The blood-red sun sank below the dusty horizon as Naomi Lawson frantically covered the small wooden cradle with a patchwork quilt, her heart pounding against her ribs at the sound of approaching hoofbeats. It had been 3 months since the fever took her baby girl, but she couldn't bear to part with the empty cradle, couldn't stand the thought of visitors seeing her shame and failure as a mother. Mojave, Arizona Territory, 1876, was unforgiving to those who showed weakness, and Naomi had endured enough pitying glances to last a lifetime. Her small homestead sat on the outskirts of town, a meager plot she'd struggled to maintain since her husband Thomas had been killed by outlaws a year ago, leaving her with child and alone. The baby had been her only hope, her reason to keep going, and now even that was gone. The knock at her door made her jump. Naomi quickly wiped her tears, smoothed her faded blue cotton dress, and tucked a loose strand of auburn hair behind her ear before opening the door. "Evening, madam," said a deep, unfamiliar voice. "Beau Harrington's the name. I heard you might have a room to let." The man before her was tall and broad-shouldered, his face partially shadowed by a well-worn Stetson. Dust covered his denim pants and cotton shirt, and a leather gun belt hugged his hips. His eyes, though they were a startling blue against his sun-browned skin, and they held a kindness that made Naomi take a small step back. "I don't know who told you that," she replied stiffly. The cowboy shifted his weight, removing his hat to reveal thick, dark hair that curled slightly at the ends. "Sheriff Thompson mentioned you sometimes take in boarders. I'm working cattle for the Henderson Ranch, but their bunkhouse is full up. Just need a place for a few months." Naomi hesitated. The money would help. God knew she needed it, but a stranger in her home, a man who might ask questions she couldn't bear to answer. "I can pay in advance," he added, sensing her reluctance. "And I won't be around much except to sleep. Early to rise, late to bed, that's the cowboy way." The promise of coin was too much to resist. Winter would come soon, and her pantry was nearly bare. $2 a week," she said finally. "Includes breakfast and supper. You do your own laundry and keep to yourself." He nodded, a slight smile lifting the corner of his mouth. "Fair enough." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small leather pouch, counting out 8 silver dollars. "That'll cover the first month." Naomi's fingers closed around the cool metal, and she stepped aside to let him enter. "Rooms this way," she said, leading him down a narrow hallway. She was grateful the spare bedroom was on the opposite end from her own, and from the room she'd prepared for her baby, the one she couldn't bring herself to enter anymore. As they passed the small alcove off the sitting room, Beau's eyes fell on the edge of the quilt-covered cradle she hadn't quite managed to hide completely. "You have a little one?" he asked conversationally. Naomi froze, her throat tightening. "No," she managed, her voice barely above a whisper. "Not anymore." Something shifted in his expression, not pity, but a deep understanding that made her wonder what losses this stranger had endured. "I'm sorry," he said simply, and asked nothing more. She showed him to the small bedroom with its narrow bed and plain furnishings. "Supper's at 6, she said, avoiding his gaze. "Don't be late or you'll go hungry." "Yes, madam," he replied, setting his saddlebags on the floor, "and thank you." Naomi nodded curtly and retreated to the kitchen, her hands trembling as she stoked the cook stove. What had she done, letting a stranger into her home, into her carefully constructed solitude where she could grieve in peace? That night, after a silent meal of beans and cornbread, Naomi lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of another person moving about her home. The floorboards creaked under his weight, and she heard the soft splash of water as he washed up before bed. She turned onto her side, curling into herself, and tried not to think about the cradle in the sitting room or the way the cowboy had looked at her with those knowing eyes. Morning came too soon, the first light of dawn barely breaking when Naomi heard Beau moving around. By the time she dragged herself from bed, he was gone, leaving only a dirty coffee cup in the sink as evidence of his presence. Days passed in this manner. Beau would leave before sunrise and return after dusk, eat the food she prepared with murmured thanks, and retire to his room. He was as unobtrusive as promised, but his presence was still a constant reminder that her solitude had been breached. A week after his arrival, Naomi was hanging laundry in the yard when she heard the whinny of a horse. Looking up, she saw Beau riding toward the house, hours earlier than usual. He dismounted with a fluid grace that spoke of years in the saddle. "Afternoon," he called, leading his horse to the water trough. "Finished early today. Thought I might fix that sagging porch step for you if you don't mind." Naomi pinned a sheet to the line, the wind snapping it against her hands. "That's not necessary. Wouldn't be proper to let it go, might cause you to take a bad fall." He was already examining the step, not waiting for her permission. "Won't take but an hour." She wanted to protest further to send him away until his usual return time, but she couldn't deny the step needed fixing. Thomas had meant to repair it, but then he'd been killed and she'd had more pressing concerns. "Fine," she relented. "There are tools in the shed." Beau nodded and headed for the small outbuilding. Naomi finished hanging the laundry, all too aware of his presence as he gathered what he needed and set to work. The rhythmic sound of his hammering filled the afternoon air, oddly comforting in its steadiness. When he finished, he straightened up, wiping sweat from his brow with his sleeve. "That should hold now. Anything else need fixing while I've got the tools out?" Naomi was about to decline when she glanced at the chicken coop with its loose boards. "The coop could use some attention," she admitted reluctantly. "The foxes have been trying to get in." He followed her gaze and nodded. "I'll see to it." By supper time, Beau had repaired not only the step and the coop, but also a leaky spot in the roof and a broken window latch. Naomi found herself making a more substantial meal than usual venison stew with the last of the carrots from her garden as a wordless thanks. They ate in silence, but it was less strained than before. When Beau pushed his empty bowl away, he cleared his throat. "That was mighty fine, Mrs. Lawson. Best meal I've had in months." "It's Miss," she corrected automatically. "I never took my husband's name officially. He died before we could file the papers." Beau nodded. "I'm sorry to hear that. Lost my wife and son 5 years back. Cholera took them both in a week." The confession hung in the air between them. Naomi stared at him, seeing him truly for the first time not as an intruder in her space, but as someone who understood the hollow ache of loss. "My daughter," she said finally, the words barely audible. She was only 3 months old when the fever came. Beau's eyes met hers, steady and compassionate. No parent should have to bury their child. Naomi looked away, unable to bear the weight of shared grief. She stood abruptly and began clearing the table. "It's getting late." Beau took the hint and stood. "Thank you for supper, Miss Lawson. I'll be heading out early again tomorrow." She nodded without looking at him, afraid of what he might see in her face. When she heard his bedroom door close, she sank into a chair, her hands covering her face as silent tears slipped through her fingers. The following day, Naomi found herself looking forward to Beau's return, an unexpected feeling that both startled and alarmed her. She told herself it was merely appreciation for the repairs he'd made, nothing more. When he arrived that evening, he brought a small package wrapped in brown paper. "Thought you might like these," he said, holding it out to her. "Picked them up in town." Naomi unwrapped the package to find a handful of peppermint sticks and a small tin of tea. "Why would you do this?" she asked, confusion evident in her tone. Beau shrugged. "Noticed you were running low on tea and everyone enjoys a sweet now and then." The simple kindness nearly undid her. She couldn't remember the last time someone had thought of her comfort. "Thank you," she said, her voice tight. That night, after a supper of cornbread and beans, Beau didn't immediately retreat to his room. Instead, he remained at the table, his hands wrapped around a mug of coffee. "Do you mind if I ask about your husband?" he said after a long silence. Naomi tensed, but found herself answering. "Thomas was a good man. We met when he came through Mojave with a cattle drive. He decided to stay, started working for Old Man Peterson at the livery. We were only married 6 months when the McAllister gang rode through. Thomas tried to stop them from robbing the bank." She swallowed hard. "He didn't stand a chance against 6 armed men." "I'm sorry," Beau said. "Did they catch the gang, 3 of them?" "The others got away with most of the money. Not that it mattered to me by then." Beau nodded slowly. "When my wife and boy died, I couldn't stay in our home in Texas. Every corner held a memory. So I started drifting, taking work where I could find it. Been doing that for 5 years now." "Does it help?" Naomi asked, genuine curiosity in her voice. "The moving around?" "Sometimes," he admitted. "But the grief, it follows you. Took me a long while to realize you don't outrun it. You just learn to carry it differently." Naomi thought about the cradle she still couldn't bear to look at, the baby clothes folded in a trunk she couldn't bring herself to open. "I don't know how to carry it differently," she whispered. Beau's hand moved across the table, not quite touching hers but close enough that she could feel the warmth of it. "You will, one day at a time." Over the next few weeks, a routine developed. Beau continued his work at the Henderson Ranch, but found time to make improvements around Naomi's homestead. She, in turn, found herself looking forward to their evening conversations, a gradual thawing of the ice around her heart. One evening in late October, Naomi returned from town to find Beau in the yard, chopping wood with powerful, rhythmic strokes. She paused to watch him, noticing the way his muscles moved beneath his shirt, the concentration in his expression. Something stirred within her, a feeling long dormant that she quickly pushed aside. "Thought we could use more firewood before the cold sets in," he explained when he saw her, driving the axe into the chopping block and wiping his brow. "Winter comes early in these parts," she agreed, adjusting her shawl against the autumn chill. "I appreciate the effort. It's the least I can do." He gestured to the house. "I noticed the cradle's gone." Naomi stiffened. She'd finally moved it to the shed that morning, a small step that had felt like tearing out a piece of herself. "It was time," she said tersely. Beau simply nodded, not pushing further. "I was thinking of riding into the hills tomorrow. There's a spot Henderson told me about, good for hunting. Might bring back some venison if you'd like." "That would be nice," she replied, surprised by his consideration. The next day, true to his word, Beau returned with a young buck slung over his saddle. Naomi helped him hang and dress the deer, working alongside him with practiced movements that spoke of her years of frontier life. "You handle a knife well," Beau observed as she expertly separated meat from bone. "My father taught me," she replied. He believed a woman should know how to fend for herself. Wise man, he was. "Died of pneumonia when I was 16. My mother followed a year later." Naomi worked in silence for a moment. "I've been on my own a long time, Mr. Harrington." "Beau," he corrected gently. "After all this butchering together, I think we can use first names, don't you?" A small smile tugged at her lips despite herself. "I suppose so. Beau." His name felt strange on her tongue, intimate in a way that made her pulse quicken. She focused intently on her task, avoiding his gaze. That evening they feasted on fresh venison steaks. Naomi had used some of her precious flour to make biscuits, and even opened a jar of preserved peaches she'd been saving. "This is a right proper feast," Beau said appreciatively. "Haven't eaten this well since," he stopped abruptly. "Since your wife was alive," Naomi finished for him. He nodded, his expression softening with memory. "Sarah was a fine cook. William, our boy, he used to say her biscuits were better than candy." A sad smile crossed his face. "He was only 4 when they died." Naomi felt a pang of empathy. "My Alina never got the chance to taste anything but milk. Sometimes I wonder what foods she would have liked, what colors would have been her favorite." She surprised herself by continuing. "I made her a quilt, you know. Started it the day I learned I was carrying her. Finished it just before she was born." "I'm sure it's beautiful," Beau said softly. "It was on her when Naomi's voice broke. I couldn't bear to bury it with her. It's still in her cradle." Beau reached across the table, and this time his hand covered hers. The touch was warm and steady, anchoring her. Keeping memories alive isn't the same as being unable to move forward. Naomi didn't pull away. "Sometimes I don't know the difference." His thumb traced a gentle circle on her wrist. "You moved the cradle. That's a start." The fire crackled in the hearth, casting long shadows across the room. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the windows and promising the first real cold of the season. "Storm's coming," Beau observed, reluctantly withdrawing his hand. "Might be a hard one." Naomi nodded, suddenly feeling the loss of his touch. "The first winter storm always is." They cleared the table together, moving around the small kitchen with an ease that spoke of growing familiarity. When their hands brushed as they both reached for the same plate, Naomi didn't flinch away as she once might have. That night, lying in bed listening to the wind howl around the eaves, Naomi thought about Beau's words. Moving forward didn't mean forgetting. Perhaps it meant carrying her grief differently, as he had suggested. The thought brought both terror and a strange comfort. The storm lasted 3 days, confining them to the house. Beau spent the time making additional repairs to the interior, fixing a loose floorboard, rehanging a door that had always stuck, caulking around the windows to keep out drafts. Naomi found herself enjoying his company, their conversations ranging from childhood memories to books. They'd read to opinions on everything from politics to the proper way to make corn fritters. She discovered Beau had a quiet humor that often caught her by surprise, drawing reluctant laughter from her. On the afternoon of the 3rd day, as the storm finally began to abate, Naomi was reaching for a jar on a high shelf when she lost her balance. Beau caught her before she could fall, his strong arms encircling her waist, her back pressed against his chest. "Careful," he murmured, his breath warm against her ear. Naomi turned in his arms, suddenly very aware of how close they were, of the steady beat of his heart against her palm where it rested on his chest. His eyes darkened as they met hers, a question in their depths. For a moment, she thought he might kiss her for a moment. She wanted him to. Then reality crashed over her and she stepped back abruptly. "Thank you," she said stiffly. "I should check on the chickens now that the storm has passed." She fled outside, gulping the cold air, her heart racing. What was happening to her? She had no right to feel this way, no right to the warmth that spread through her when Beau looked at her. It felt like a betrayal of Thomas, of Alina, of her grief itself. Naomi spent the rest of the day avoiding Beau as much as possible in the confines of the small house. If he noticed, he gave no sign, keeping his distance and speaking only when necessary. That night, after a silent supper, Beau announced he would be returning to work at the Henderson Ranch the next day. "Storm will have caused some damage, cattle scattered," he explained. "Might be gone a few days helping round them up. Naomi nodded, ignoring the sudden hollow feeling in her chest. I understand. He hesitated, then added, when I get back, I think it's time I found other accommodations. She looked up sharply. What? Why? Beau met her gaze steadily. I think you know why, Naomi. The sound of her name on his lips sent a tremor through her. I don't, she began, but couldn't finish the lie. I respect you too much to pretend, he said quietly, and I've been down this road before. After Sarah and William died, I thought my heart had died with them. When I started feeling again for a schoolteacher in a little town in Colorado, I ran. Couldn't bear the guilt of it. What happened? Naomi asked, her voice barely audible. By the time I realized my mistake, she'd married another man. He shook his head. I don't want to make the same mistake again, but I also won't put you in an uncomfortable position, so I'll go. Naomi stared at her hands, twisted together in her lap. I don't know what I feel, she admitted. Or what I'm allowed to feel. Beau sighed. No one can tell you that, but I've seen how you try to hide that empty cradle, how you flinch whenever a child is mentioned. Grief has its place, but it can't be all there is. Her head snapped up, anger flashing in her eyes. What would you have me do? Forget my baby. Pretend she never existed. No, he said firmly. Never that. But Alina wouldn't want her mama to stop living, and from what you've told me, neither would Thomas. The truth of his words struck her like a physical blow. Would Thomas want her to spend the rest of her days in mourning? Would her baby girl, if she could somehow know, want her mother's life to end with hers? Tears spilled down Naomi's cheeks. I'm afraid, she whispered. Beau moved to kneel beside her chair, his hand covering hers. Of what? Of feeling anything but grief, of being happy when they can't be, of caring for someone new. His fingers tightened around hers. Loving again doesn't diminish what you felt for them. It honors it. Naomi looked into his eyes, seeing the sincerity there, the understanding that could only come from someone who had walked the same painful path. I don't know if I can, she said honestly. You don't have to know now. Beau rose to his feet. I'll be gone a few days. Use the time to think. If you want me to find another place when I return, I will. No hard feelings. But if you think there might be room in your life for something more than memories. He trailed off, letting the unspoken possibility hang between them. With that, he bid her good night and retreated to his room, leaving Naomi alone with her thoughts and the echo of his words. The days of Beau's absence stretched long and empty. Naomi went about her chores mechanically, tending the chickens, mending clothes, preserving the last of the venison. But the house felt hollow without his presence, the silence no longer peaceful but oppressive. At night, she lay awake, her mind wrestling with questions she had never allowed herself to consider. Was it possible to honor her losses while still embracing life? Could she open her heart again without betraying the love she still felt for Thomas and Alina? On the third day, driven by a restlessness she couldn't explain, Naomi walked to the shed and pulled open the door. There, in the dimness, sat the cradle, covered with the patchwork quilt she had lovingly stitched for her daughter. With trembling hands, she lifted the quilt, running her fingers over the carefully sewn squares pieces of her own childhood dress, a scrap from Thomas's Sunday shirt, fabric from the curtains in their first home together. A tapestry of love and hope and dreams. Naomi sank to her knees beside the cradle, clutching the quilt to her chest as tears flowed freely. She cried for Alina, for the life she never got to live, for Thomas, taken too soon, for herself and all the dreams that had died with them. When the storm of grief finally passed, she felt different, not healed, perhaps, but lighter somehow, as if a burden she'd been carrying had shifted, allowing her to stand straighter beneath its weight. Carefully folding the quilt, Naomi placed it in the trunk with Alina's clothes and the small toys Thomas had carved in anticipation of their child's birth. She would not hide these things away, but neither would they dominate her life. They were part of her story, but not the whole of it. On the fourth day, as Naomi was hanging laundry in the yard, she heard the now familiar sound of Beau's horse approaching. Her heart quickened as she saw him riding toward the house, his figure silhouetted against the afternoon sun. He dismounted slowly, looking tired but smiling when he saw her. "Naomi," he said simply, removing his hat. "Beau." She took a step toward him, then hesitated. "I've been thinking about what you said." His expression remained carefully neutral. "And I don't want you to find other accommodations," she said, the words coming in a rush. "I want you to stay. I don't know what that means exactly or what might happen, but I know I'm not ready for you to go." Relief and something deeper flickered across his face. "Are you sure?" Naomi nodded. "I visited Alina's grave yesterday, told her about you." Her voice trembled slightly. "I think she would have liked you." Beau closed the distance between them, his hands gentle as they took hers. "I would have liked her too, very much." "I can't promise anything," Naomi warned. "I don't know if I can ever be what you might want." "I'm not asking for promises," he assured her. "Just a chance, for both of us." She squeezed his hands, a tentative smile lifting the corners of her mouth. "I think I can manage that." That evening they sat on the porch together, watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. Beau told her about the work at the Henderson ranch, the cattle they'd found sheltering in a canyon, the repairs needed after the storm. When he finished, he turned to look at her, his expression serious. "There's something else. Henderson offered me a permanent position, foreman of the North Range." Naomi's heart sank. The North Range of the Henderson property was a good 20 miles away. "That's a fine opportunity," she said, trying to keep disappointment from her voice. "It is," Beau agreed. "Comes with a small house and good pay, but I told him I needed to think on it." "Why?" she asked, though she thought she knew the answer. His eyes held hers. "Because my reasons for staying in Mojave have changed. What started as just a job has become something more." Naomi felt a blush warm her cheeks. "Oh," she said softly. Beau smiled, reaching out to tuck a strand of hair behind her ear, his fingers lingering against her cheek. "I told Henderson I'd give him my answer in a month. That gives us time." "Time for what?" "To see where this leads. No pressure, no expectations. Just two people getting to know each other." Naomi leaned slightly into his touch. "I'd like that." As November gave way to December, Naomi and Beau settled into a new rhythm. He continued working at the Henderson ranch but made a point of returning each evening. They shared meals and conversations, gradually learning the contours of each other's lives, the hopes and fears that shaped them. Beau told her about growing up on a small farm in Kentucky, about meeting Sarah at a church picnic when they were both 18, about their dreams of a ranch of their own in Texas, cut short by the epidemic that took his family. Naomi shared stories of her childhood in Missouri, her parents' decision to move west after the war, the hard years of establishing themselves in Arizona territory, and the loneliness that followed their deaths. "Is that why you married Thomas?" Beau asked one evening as they sat by the fire. "Because you were lonely," Naomi considered the question. "Partly," she admitted, "but also because he was kind and steady. He didn't make grand promises he couldn't keep, just offered what he had, a good heart and willing hands." "Sounds like a fine man," Beau said sincerely. "He was. Different from you, but good in his own way." She studied Beau's face in the firelight. "What about Sarah? What was she like?" A fond smile lifted his lips. "Determined. Once she set her mind to something, there was no changing it. And joyful she could find something to laugh about in the worst situations." His expression grew wistful. "William was just like her, always running, always curious. I used to worry he'd wear Sarah out, but she matched his energy step for step. Naomi reached for his hand, a gesture that had become natural between them. They sound wonderful. They were. Beau squeezed her fingers. Just as I'm sure Alina would have been wonderful with you for her mother. Tears pricked at Naomi's eyes, but they weren't the devastating grief that had once consumed her. This was a gentler sorrow, a sweet ache of remembrance. Thank you for saying that. As Christmas approached, Naomi found herself looking forward to the holiday for the first time in years. She baked cookies using precious sugar saved from her meager supplies and hung pine boughs over the doorways, filling the house with their fresh scent. Beau returned from town one afternoon with a small fir tree tied to his saddle. "Thought we might need this," he said, grinning at her surprised expression. Together they set up the tree in the corner of the sitting room. Naomi brought out paper ornaments she and her mother had made years ago, carefully preserved in tissue paper. Beau contributed a silver star for the top, carved by his own hand during the evenings. "It's beautiful," Naomi said when they'd finished, standing back to admire their work. "Not as beautiful as the woman beside me," Beau replied softly. Naomi turned to find him watching her, his eyes warm with an emotion she was no longer afraid to name. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, he bent his head and brushed his lips against hers. The kiss was gentle, a question rather than a demand. Naomi found herself responding, her hands moving to rest on his shoulders as his arms encircled her waist. When they finally parted, she was breathless, her heart racing. "I didn't know," she whispered. "Didn't know what?" he asked, his voice husky. "That I could feel this way again. That there could be joy after so much sorrow." Beau's smile was tender as he brushed a tear from her cheek, a tear she hadn't even realized she'd shed. "That's the miracle of the human heart, Naomi. It can break and still keep beating. It can empty and still be filled again." On Christmas morning, Naomi woke to the smell of coffee and the sound of quiet movement in the kitchen. She dressed quickly and found Beau at the stove, frying bacon and looking surprisingly at ease in the domestic setting. "Merry Christmas," he said, smiling as she entered. "Thought you deserved breakfast for once." "Merry Christmas," she replied, touched by the gesture. "You didn't have to do this. Wanted to." He slid a plate of bacon and eggs in front of her as she sat at the table. "I have something for you, a gift." Naomi felt a flash of panic. She had nothing for him beyond the new woolen socks she'd knitted. Hardly an adequate exchange for whatever had put that nervous look on his face. "You didn't need to get me anything," she protested. "It's not exactly a thing I bought," he explained, sitting across from her. "More of a decision I've made." Naomi waited, suddenly anxious. "I talked to Henderson yesterday," Beau continued. "Told him I'd take the foreman job on one condition, that I can live here in town instead of at the North Range house." "But that's a long ride every day," Naomi said, confused. "Worth it, if it means coming home to you each night." Beau reached across the table to take her hand. "If you'll have me, that is." Naomi stared at him, understanding dawning. "Are you asking to continue as my boarder or something more?" "I'm asking if I can court you properly, Naomi Lawson, with the intention of making you my wife when you're ready." Her breath caught in her throat. Part of her wanted to say yes immediately. Another part hesitated, old fears rising to the surface. What if she began, then stopped, afraid to voice her deepest fear? "What if what?" Beau prompted gently. "What if we have children and I lose them too?" The words tumbled out in a rush. "I don't think I could bear it, Beau. Not again." Understanding softened his features. "There are no guarantees in this life, Naomi. We both know that better than most. But would you truly choose never to love again just to avoid the possibility of loss?" Tears welled in her eyes. "When you put it like that, it sounds foolish." "Not foolish," he corrected, squeezing her hand. Human, scared, but the Naomi I've come to know is brave enough to take that risk. She looked into his eyes, seeing the future he offered, not a perfect one, not one free from pain or sorrow, but one filled with love and possibility. Yes, she said finally, her voice growing stronger. Yes, I'll let you court me, Beau Harrington. His face lit with joy, and he leaned across the table to kiss her, heedless of the breakfast between them. Winter gave way to spring, and with the changing season came a transformation in Naomi. The hollow grief that had defined her for so long didn't disappear, but it softened, making room for new emotions: happiness, hope, and increasingly, love. Beau proved to be a patient suitor, never rushing her, always attuned to her moods and needs. He continued his work at the Henderson Ranch, earning respect for his skill with horses and cattle. In town, people began to recognize them as a couple, nodding approvingly when they attended church together or shopped for supplies. One warm day in April, Naomi asked Beau to accompany her to the small cemetery on the hill overlooking Mojave. They stood together before the two modest graves, Thomas's weathered wooden cross, and the smaller one beside it that marked a leaner's resting place. "I used to come here every day," Naomi said, her voice steady. "Then every week. Now it's been almost a month." She looked at Beau. "I was afraid I was forgetting them." "You're not," he assured her. "You're just living your life as they would want you to." Naomi nodded, bending to place the wildflowers she'd brought on both graves. "I wanted them to meet you properly, and I wanted to tell them." She took a deep breath. "That I'm ready to marry you if you still want that." Beau's eyes widened in surprise, then crinkled with happiness. "Are you sure? You don't need more time, I'm sure," she said firmly. "Life is too short and too precious to waste another day." He took her hands in his expression solemn despite his joy. "I promise to honor your past, Naomi. Thomas and Alina will always be part of your life, and I would never want to change that." Tears sprang to her eyes, but they were tears of gratitude, not sadness. "I know. That's why I love you." It was the first time she'd said the words aloud, and they felt right, true in a way she hadn't expected. "And I love you," Beau replied, drawing her into his arms as the spring breeze ruffled the wildflowers on the graves beside them. They were married in May, a simple ceremony in the small church in Mojave. Sheriff Thompson stood as Beau's best man, and Martha Henderson, the ranch owner's wife who had taken a liking to Naomi, served as her matron of honor. That evening, as Beau carried her across the threshold of what was now their home, Naomi felt a sense of rightness, of coming full circle. This house that had witnessed so much grief would now be filled with new memories, new hope. Later, lying in Beau's arms, she confessed the fear that still lingered in her heart. What if we can't have children? Or what if Beau silenced her with a gentle kiss? "Whatever happens, we'll face it together. And if God blesses us with children, they'll be loved doubly by us and by the memories of those who came before." Summer passed in a haze of happiness as Naomi and Beau settled into married life. He continued his work at the Henderson Ranch, eventually convincing the owner to sell them a small parcel of land adjoining Naomi's property, allowing them to expand their homestead. In September, just as the leaves began to turn, Naomi missed her monthly course. She waited another week before sharing her suspicions with Beau, afraid to hope too fervently. When she finally told him, his face lit with wonder and trepidation that mirrored her own. "A baby," he whispered, laying his hand gently on her still flat stomach. "I think so," she replied. "But Beau, I'm so afraid. What if, no what ifs," he said firmly. "Just today and the blessing we've been given." As her body changed with the growing life inside her, Naomi's fear gradually gave way to cautious joy. The town's midwife, Mrs. Gentry, confirmed her pregnancy and pronounced her healthy, though she warned that at 32, Naomi should take extra care. Beau treated her like precious glass, insisting on taking over the heavier chores despite her protests that pregnancy wasn't an illness. His protectiveness both annoyed and touched her, a tangible expression of his love for her and their unborn child. One evening in her 5th month, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Beau asked the question she'd been avoiding. "Have you thought about the cradle? Would you want to use a leaner's, or should I build a new one?" Naomi's hand moved instinctively to her swelling belly. She'd thought of little else in recent weeks, turning the question over in her mind each night before sleep claimed her. "I think," she said slowly, "that I would like to use a leaner's cradle. Not because I'm trying to replace her, no child could ever do that, but because it feels right somehow, like she's giving her blessing." Beau nodded, understanding in his eyes. "I think so too. But I'll sand it down and repaint it, give it a fresh start." The following weekend, they retrieved the cradle from the shed together. Beau worked on it diligently, smoothing rough edges, replacing a loose spindle and painting it a soft green instead of the original white. When he finished, Naomi laid the patchwork quilt inside the one she'd made for a leaner, with a new square added, a piece of the shirt Beau had been wearing the day they met. "It's perfect," she said, running her hand over the smooth wood. As winter settled over Mojave once more, Naomi's time grew near. The baby was active, kicking and rolling in a way that sometimes kept her awake at night. Beau would place his hand on her belly, marveling at the movement, his face a mixture of awe and nervous anticipation. "What shall we name him?" he asked one night as they lay in bed, his hand resting protectively over their child. "Him?" Naomi smiled in the darkness. "So sure it's a boy, just a feeling," Beau admitted, "but a girl would be just as welcome." Naomi was silent for a moment, considering. "If it's a boy, I'd like to name him William Thomas," she said finally. "For your son and my husband, if that wouldn't be too painful for you." Beau's arms tightened around her. "It would be an honor," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "And if it's a girl?" "Sarah Eleanor," she replied without hesitation. "For your wife and my daughter." He pressed a kiss to her temple. "Perfect names for a perfect child." The labor began on a snowy January morning in 1878. Beau rode through the storm to fetch Mrs. Gentry, returning with the midwife just as Naomi's pains were intensifying. "You're doing fine, Mrs. Harrington," the older woman assured her after an examination. "Baby's positioned well. Now we wait." The hours stretched long and painful, Beau a constant presence at Naomi's side, wiping her brow, letting her crush his hand during contractions, murmuring encouragement when her strength flagged. As twilight fell, bringing with it a fresh wave of snow, Naomi felt the overwhelming urge to push. Mrs. Gentry positioned herself at the end of the bed, her experienced hands ready. "I see the head," she announced. "One more good push, Naomi." Gathering her remaining strength, Naomi bore down, a cry torn from her throat as she felt the child slide from her body. For one terrifying moment, there was silence, and then a robust wail filled the room. "A boy," Mrs. Gentry said, her voice warm with pleasure. "A fine, healthy boy." Tears streamed down Naomi's face as the midwife placed the squalling infant on her chest. She looked down at his red, wrinkled face, the shock of dark hair, the tiny fists waving in protest at his sudden entry into the cold world. "William Thomas Harrington," she whispered, her heart so full it felt it might burst. Beau bent to kiss her forehead, his own eyes wet with tears. "He's perfect," he said, his voice choked with emotion. "You're perfect. I love you both so much." "Would you like to hold your son?" Naomi asked, seeing the longing in his face. With reverent hands, Beau lifted the small bundle, cradling him close to his chest. The baby quieted, seeming to study his father's face with solemn dark eyes. "Hello, William," Beau said softly. "You have quite a legacy to live up to, little man, named for two fine men who would have loved you dearly." After Mrs. Gentry had cleaned up and departed, promising to return in the morning, Beau settled the sleeping infant in the cradle beside their bed. He stood looking down at his son, wonder etched on his features. "I never thought I'd have this again," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "A child of my own, a family." Naomi reached for his hand, drawing him to sit beside her on the bed. "Nor did I. It feels like a miracle." "It is." Beau stroked her hair back from her face. "But so are you, Naomi. You tried to hide your empty cradle that first day, but I saw it, and I saw you trying so hard to be strong while your heart was breaking." "You helped me heal," she said simply. Beau shook his head. "No, you did that yourself. I just reminded you it was possible." As if sensing he was the topic of conversation, little William stirred in his cradle, making the small mewling sounds that would soon turn to hungry cries. Beau lifted him, bringing him to Naomi's arms, where he nestled against her breast and began to nurse. Looking down at her son's dark head, feeling the perfect weight of him in her arms and the presence of her husband beside her, Naomi felt a sense of completion, of having come home after a long journey. She thought of the empty cradle she had tried so desperately to hide, of the grief she had thought would consume her forever. Beau had been right that day when he'd said she would fill it with hope again, not replacing what was lost, but creating something new from the ashes of sorrow. "I love you," she told Beau, reaching for his hand. "And I love you," he replied, squeezing her fingers gently. "Both of you." Outside, the snow continued to fall, blanketing the world in white, while inside the small house on the edge of Mojave, a family newly formed slept peacefully, safe in the knowledge that love, both remembered and present, would sustain them through whatever the future might bring. As the years passed, the Harrington family flourished. William grew into a strong, curious boy with his father's blue eyes and his mother's quiet determination. When he was 3, a sister joined the family, Sarah Eleanor, with a mop of auburn curls and a smile that lit up the room. Beau continued his work at the Henderson Ranch, but also expanded their own land, adding cattle and horses until they had a respectable small ranch of their own. Naomi maintained a thriving vegetable garden and became known throughout Mojave for her preserves and quilts, which she sold for extra income. They never forgot those they had lost. On the anniversaries of their deaths, the family would visit the cemetery, placing flowers and telling the children stories about the people whose names they carried. It was important to both Naomi and Beau that William and Sarah knew they were part of a larger legacy of love. When William was 10 and Sarah 7, Naomi gave birth to twin girls, Lucy and Grace, unexpected blessings that completed their family. The house, once so empty and silent, now rang with children's laughter and the everyday chaos of family life. On a warm evening in the summer of 1888, as Naomi sat on the porch watching Beau teaching William to rope a fence post while the girls chased fireflies in the yard, she reflected on the journey that had brought her here. The cradle that had once stood empty, a symbol of her deepest grief, had cradled 4 healthy children and now sat in the attic, awaiting the day it might be needed for grandchildren. The patchwork quilt she'd made for Eleanor had been used by all her children and still lay folded at the foot of the twins' bed, a tangible link between past and present. Beau came to sit beside her, his arm slipping naturally around her shoulders. At 44, his hair was beginning to gray at the temples, and lines of laughter marked the corners of his eyes. But he was still the same man who had appeared at her door that dusty evening 12 years ago. "Penny for your thoughts," he said, pressing a kiss to her temple. Naomi leaned into his embrace. "I was just thinking about how lucky we are, how full our life is." Beau's eyes followed their children as they played in the twilight. "Indeed we are," he squeezed her shoulder. "No regrets." She knew what he was asking, whether she ever regretted opening her heart again, taking the risk of loving and potentially losing once more. "Not one," she said firmly. "Everything we've built together, the family we've created, it was worth every moment of fear, every doubt I had to overcome." Beau's smile was tender as he turned her face to his. "I told you you'd fill that empty cradle with hope again." Naomi kissed him, a lifetime of love and gratitude in the gesture. "You were right, Cowboy. You were absolutely right." As night fell over the Harrington ranch, stars appearing one by one in the vast Arizona sky, Naomi looked at the home and family she had never expected to have again after such devastating loss. Life had not been perfect. There had been hardships, arguments, moments of fear and doubt, but through it all, love had prevailed. The empty cradle that had once symbolized all she had lost had indeed been filled not just with children, but with the hope, joy, and purpose that came from daring to live fully again, from embracing both the pain and beauty of a life richly lived. And for that, Naomi Lawson Harrington would be forever grateful to the dusty cowboy who had seen past her defenses to the wounded heart beneath, who had believed in her capacity to heal when she herself had lost faith, and who had helped her build a future bright enough to honor the past without being imprisoned by it.